and repent of what they did at Mickey's house. 2 Chronicles chapter 13, we'll arrive there in just a minute. Kevin, it's good to see you. Come up here, make sure I get to shake your hand before you leave, okay? 2 Chronicles 13. How many know we're living today in a nation that perhaps has not been as divided as maybe since the Civil War? We're divided in states that are called blue states and red states. We're not the North and South any longer. We're divided by names known as conservative and liberals. It's not the first time that God's made distinctions. It says in the book of Malachi, you don't need to turn to it, but in Malachi chapter 3, listen to what the Lord says in verse 18. So you will again distinguish between the righteous and the wicked, between those who serve God and the ones who do not serve him. How many know more than liberal or conservative in our politics? We want to be known as those who serve God, separated from those who do not serve God. Sadly, that's become a line of distinction that even in the church is getting harder and harder to tell. Because not too many years ago, people decided they wanted everybody to feel welcome. They didn't want anybody to be offended. So they started taking songs out of churches, songs that talked about blood. They said, oh, that's too gory for people. And then they said, oh, the cross, that's too morbid of an image, so let's remove that. Then they decided to not make people have to feel self-conscious, so they turned lights down real low so you could just feel like you're in a nightclub. They didn't say that, but I've been in enough nightclubs to know that's what it felt like rather than a place of worship. There are all kinds of subtleties the enemy did. One of the things that happened was when they all of a sudden began to develop worship teams. You say, are you criticizing other people? The only thing I'm criticizing is where we became so practiced and routine in what we're going to perform that even in our charismatic services, we were able to program the Holy Spirit right out because it didn't fit into what our agenda was going to be of the choruses we're going to sing for that morning. How many are grateful and want us to keep on singing with whatever the Holy Spirit leads us to do? In 2 Chronicles chapter 13, there was another civil war that was going on. Let me give you the background on the story. The nation of Israel, when they crossed into the promised land, was to be one nation. But they became divided. After Solomon died and his son ascended to the throne, Rehoboam, it says he wasn't strong enough to maintain keeping the kingdom together. There was another man named Jeroboam. They really got split up over counsel because Rehoboam was going to continue the work of the Lord in the kingdom. And the older men said, listen, your dad, Solomon, he was hard on the people to build the temple. Why don't you be easy on the people and they'll follow you? And the young men came along and said, hey, if your dad was tough, you'd be tougher. And he listened to the young men instead of the elders' counsel. And as a result of that, the kingdom had unrest. And in that unsettledness in the kingdom, it says that there was another guy named Jeroboam. He was a servant of David, but he wasn't one of the descendants of David. God intended there to be a descendant of David on the throne. And there will be. It'll be restored. Because how many know Jesus is the son of David? He's coming back, and he's going to take that throne back. It's his. In the meantime, Jeroboam led a revolt, and the kingdom became divided. It became known as the northern kingdom. Israel had Samaria as its capital. And Jeroboam became the ruler there. Then, after Rehoboam died, there was a king named Abijah, and he ascended to the throne. And when he ascended to the throne, he was now king of what was the southern kingdom known as Israel. And it had Jerusalem as the capital. And the kingdom was now divided. A civil war was going on. So much so that if you read in this chapter, when the Civil War took place, Abijah, he got 800,000 with him to come against those that were, Jeroboam got 800,000 to come against Abijah's only 400,000. And he had a strategy. And his strategy was this: when he came against Jerusalem's capital, there down in Judah, the southern kingdom, he said, here's what we'll do. We'll besiege them with a part of us up in the front, but then we'll go around and flank them from the rear. So just about the time they think they're being attacked from the front, then we'll attack them from behind. And if you look there very carefully, it says in around verse 13, put your glasses on, Phil. Verse 14, when Judah turned around, behold, they were attacked both from the front and the rear. So they cried to the Lord, and the priest blew the trumpets. Then the men of Judah raised a war cry. And you'll skip down to verse 18, the last part. The sons of Judah conquered because they trusted in the Lord. Now, will you look up here just for a minute? Let me try to pick up where we left off last week. When the kingdom was divided, there were enemies that were able to come in. The way the enemy came in, first of all, was a nation known as Assyria. Not Syria that we know today, Assyria. And when the Assyrians came in, they attacked the northern kingdom. And when they did that, they were scattered. As a result of the children of God being scattered, then the Babylonians came because they were weakened. They were scattered. And as a result of now the people of God being scattered, now Babylon came and took them captive. Do you hear the two different phases? First of all, the kingdom was divided. The civil war. And when it was divided, it made it possible then for the enemy to scatter them. And once they were scattered, now they were able to be taken captive. When Jesus came, and it says he preached the fulfillment of Isaiah 61 that we looked at for those of us that were together last week, we saw there was one thing that Jesus repeated. He said he came to set captives free and to release prisoners. Why did he repeat that? It almost seems redundant there. Captives being free and prisoners being set free. Why did he repeat that? Because that's exactly the way it happened with the children of Israel. When they were divided, now they were scattered and they were captive. And if the enemy can get us, now listen, how many know even as a church, if he can bring division, that's when all of a sudden then he'll get people to be scattered. We've known what it is to go through a church split. Some went one way, some went another way. But can I tell you what our experience has been in now nearly the 19 years that that's happened? A majority of the people ended up going nowhere. They just got scattered. What's true in a nation, what's true in church, how many know we can have a civil war even in our own lives? Romans chapter 7, we won't turn to it right now, but the Apostle Paul wrote what I believe was a state as a believer. And listen to what he said. He said, the things I desire to do, I don't do. And the things I don't want to do, I do. Oh, wretched man that I am. How many have ever been at the place since you've known Christ that you've had that civil war in your own life? There have been things that you didn't want to do and you ended up doing them. And the things you wanted to do, those are the very things you didn't get done. That can become a civil war in our life. And if the enemy can all of a sudden, that's why Jesus said in Matthew chapter 12, we won't turn to it right now, but in verses 23 through 30, Jesus said, a kingdom divided against itself, it can't stand. Neither can a city, neither can a house, and neither can an individual. And then Jesus, in that context where he talked about being divided And Satan not being against Satan. So Jesus isn't of Satan. Jesus comes and he says, I want you to know something. There's right and there's wrong. There's good and there's bad. And there are two companies here. And I want you to know I've come to set you free. And I'm not doing it by the enemy. But I'll tell you how I do it. And then he gave an illustration. He said, you don't even go into a house and you plunder it unless first of all you bind the strong man. Because you see, once the enemy can come into our lives and bring a civil war, he then can get us scattered away from the things of God. And once he gets us scattered from the things of God, he'll get us away slowly from going to the house of God. And then after he gets us away from the house of God, the things of God just don't become important anymore. Hanging out with the people of God and doing the things of God, that just isn't what's really relevant to our lives anymore. And once he can get us scattered from the things of God in the midst of our being in a civil war in our own life, now he can take us captive. And we need Jesus to come. He said, I came not only to preach the gospel and get people saved, but I also came to proclaim that people can get set free and they can be delivered and they don't have to have a strong man in their lives anymore. Now, you say, well, he was talking about demons there. Well, would you look over, if you will, please, in Luke chapter 6. And look with me in verses 17 through 19. Jesus is coming down out of a mountain. And in coming down out of the mountain, he had spent the night praying because he needed to know who the Lord, his Father, was going to give him to be his 12 disciples. And as soon as he came down after selecting who the Lord had directed him, because he said he didn't do anything unless the Father had told him to do it. And after those 12 had been chosen, he came in contact. Look at what it says. With someone who, verses 18 and 19, was troubled with unclean spirits. The word there is harassed. It doesn't say there that she was possessed. Everybody gets all caught up with terminology, and if the enemy can get us all confused with terminology, then he can delude the truth that we need to realize. And that is, the Lord wants us to discern that there are spirits that want to trouble us. There are spirits that want to come along into our lives and bring a civil war into our life. And if they can bring a civil war and get our lives divided, the next thing you know, we'll start getting scattered, because these spirits can so trouble us that we begin to be discouraged, and we begin to doubt, and we begin to question, and we begin to wonder why things aren't working the way we thought they were going to work. And instead of a tree of life, now we eat of a tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and now we become in bondage, because with that knowledge of good and evil, we start saying, now wait a minute, I thought this was going to be what was good for me, and this was going to be what's bad for me. And the stuff I thought was bad, that's the stuff that seems to be happening. And the good, that seems to be eluding. So now we think we've got to start becoming responsible for our own happiness. And the next thing you know, there are Christians that instead of the joy of the Lord being their strength, they've got spirits that trouble them. Matter of fact, if you found that verse where it says in Luke chapter 6, the spirits that troubled, it literally means harass them. And it comes from the Greek word to be a mob. How many of you ever felt like you just had a mob ganging up on you? Well, what are some of these strong men that Jesus referred to? That he said, first of all, they got to be bound in our lives. If we don't understand this, listen carefully. If we don't understand this, we're going to miss in the church what deliverance is all about. Because you see, the enemy will delude us. He'll throw a bone to you. And that is, if all of a sudden we begin praying and we don't discern what the strong man is, and that can only happen through discerning of spirits. All of a sudden then, we start thinking these other issues are the problem. And because they get set free from these other issues, then they're all right. The enemy doesn't care if he throws you a bone, as long as he gets to keep being the strong man. He'll just find another bone. Are y'all hearing what I'm saying? I know it's a Sunday morning and it's a nice day. You wish you were out roasting a weenie, but you're in God's house. So you might as well get something out of it while you're here. And I know we're moving in a direction maybe not everybody's going to want to hear, but I know this much from the Bible study from people on Wednesday night that are helping us by praying as we're coming on Sunday morning, preparing for this, that God's going to give us liberty in God's house, because there are many that are still in God's house that are in the midst of a civil war. Let's just take a look. How many have ever battled with these? And I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands. You just answer in your own life. How many have ever had a battle, not with what Pastor Anthony preached a few weeks ago, with just some of these sudden fears that come along with you where you get frightened, but you've all of a sudden known what it is to have a spirit of fear that can come on you. Let me show you a few ways that it can be manifested. How many have ever had a fear that's bound you up by a what if? What if the report comes back and it's cancer? How many have ever had that fear? What if all of a sudden I lose my job? What if I can't pay my bills? What if all of a sudden I lose my house? What if? All kinds of what ifs can come into our lives. Or how many have had this? How many have ever had a fear that's possessed you? If only you hadn't done something. How many have ever, don't raise your hand. If only I hadn't got involved with this person. If only I had done this. If only I had gone there. If only back then I had. Boy, the enemy can make that something that's a bondage. Or how many have had this one? Maybe you've heard me talk about it before. How many have ever had the fear bind you up that you think you've got to act as if something? I'm going to act as if I'm not bothered. I'm going to act as if I'm not hurt. I'm going to act as if, because I'm afraid if anybody really knew how I felt about it, maybe they're not going to like me. Maybe they're going to judge me. Maybe I'll be rejected. So now I'm going to put something up as an as if. That can become a spirit in your life and you're bound by it. Romans chapter 8 verse 15 says there is a spirit of bondage. So that's people you know with drugs, alcohol, smoking, that's those people. I don't know, sex, pornography, that's those people. I know some people in bondage to little things like clothes, shopping, food. Boy, it's gotten quiet in here this morning. Can I tell you one that got a hold of me not too long ago? Fox News. You say, are you picking on Fox News? No, if I'm going to watch the news, that's what I watch. You say you're promoting it? Yeah, probably. But when I got addicted to it. I just got the place, it was on 24/7. It was so much so that when the Lord finally dealt with me about it, Jennifer came home from work, and when she walked in, she went, am I telling the truth, babe? She walked in, she said, you okay? I said, why? She said, Fox News isn't on. And that's when I knew something must be wrong, that my wife's asking me if I'm okay because I don't have it on. So I started turning Jimmy Swaggart on. How many know the enemy can get us in bondage? All kinds of things. I'm going to name this one because I'm going to ask some of you to pray. And I'm so grateful to see Sister Bonnie here and her faith for me last week. And I'm receiving it, but I want you to know I don't want to get our eyes so much on outward that we miss an inward. And I'll talk more about that if you'll come back tonight. But this is what I want to say. I know there is a spirit that I've not been able to get victory of, and that's a spirit of infirmity. And it has got a strong hold on me. I've just come through it for the past 2 days. And I continually say it. And I don't know what I'm searching in my own life. And I'm doing this. So some of you go, well, Phil, why are you saying that in front of God and everybody like that? So that you'll start getting free, that you can start talking about it in front of God and everybody, because some of you have got spirits too. Want me to give you the verses on these? 2 Timothy 1:7 is the one that says the spirit of fear. Romans 8:15 says the spirit of bondage. Luke 13:11 says the spirit of infirmity. I'm firmly a believer of this. If it makes anybody offended, God, if you don't know my heart, God, please help us. I believe in Imago Dei, there is a spirit of infirmity that wants to attach itself to us. And we're fighting it all the time. Acts chapter 16, verses 16 through 18 says, there is such thing as a spirit of pressure. When I taught a few weeks ago about stress, I was literally inundated with people that contacted me after that message and saying, can you give us a little bit more about that? Or thank God you taught it, because that's been going on in my own life. Can I tell you something? If it goes on long enough, that can move from just being something stressful in a situation, and it can be a spirit that wants to get a stronghold in our life and become a strong man to put pressure upon us. In Acts chapter 16, it's even referred to as the spirit of Python. How many know a python snake will just choke you to death? Isaiah chapter 61 and verse 3 says there is a spirit of depression. How many know there's some people that have that spirit? Can you just get around some people and before you leave, you're down? Does anybody know anybody like that? There are some people that one of the disadvantages of being handicapped is I can't walk fast enough to get past them. You know, they're the people, you've heard me say it before. Cheer up, things could be worse. And they cheered up, and sure enough, things got worse. They're just like that. Years ago, Dad used to get a slip. And on the slip, there would be the attendance today, the attendance last week, and the attendance last year. And the offering today, and the offering last week, and the offering last year. And somebody would always be sure the lowest figure would be the one circled. And I'd sit next to Dad. And if it was the lowest offering last year, or the lowest offering this year, or the lowest offering last week, that would be the one that was circled. Instead of, how many know there's just some people that all of a sudden that can be the way it is? May not like this one, but Numbers chapter 5 and verse 14 says, there's a spirit of jealousy. Do you know that we can become jealous? What is jealousy? It's the fear of being displaced. That's why God's the only one in the universe that gets to say he's jealous. He says it in his word. He says, I'm a jealous God. How come you get to be jealous and I don't? Because God doesn't want to be displaced in our lives, and he never should be. Because if you ever displace him in your life, it's going to only be a replacement of something inferior. God's the best thing that could ever happen to any of us. But in our own lives, when all of a sudden that becomes a fear that I may be displaced, a spirit can get a stronghold in our lives. Do you know that in Isaiah chapter 27, there's another spirit that's identified with a creature? It's called a Leviathan. And the reason it's there is because it says in Isaiah chapter 19 and verse 14, there is a spirit of perversion or distortion. And how many know there can come a Leviathan or the crocodile that can twist what it gets a hold of? It can distort what it gets a hold of. How many in your own life have ever had times in your life where all of a sudden you've looked at something and you've gone, this is too big for me. I can't get over this. I'll never get it done. Or he can also distort something else. Oh, this is just a little thing. I don't have to worry about that. I don't need to go down the altar about it. I don't need to, oh, it's just a little thing. And all of a sudden, if the enemy can get us either to do something too little or something too big, now he can get a foothold in our life. Because of a spirit of distortion. Can I give you another one found in Leviticus 19? And this is the one we're going to camp on just for a little bit. In Leviticus 19 and verse 31, and there's others. We're not just going to get into them. You know, there's lying spirits. There are seducing spirits. There's even a spirit of slumber. There's spirit of Antichrist, spirit of pride. But in Leviticus 19, listen to what it says in verse 31. There's a familiar spirit. Now, everybody thinks familiar spirits are identified with people like Edgar Casey. He was called the dreaming prophet. Or Jean Dixon. Some of you may remember her. You say, well, she was in astrology. She started off with consulting a snake that came at the end of her bed. I mean, no, anytime a woman talks to a snake, it never goes good. Charlie, if you go home today and Joan's talking to a snake, don't pay attention to it. Jennifer talks to a lot of snakes in the grass, but that's a whole different thing we're not going to get into. What's a familiar spirit? Let's not just let it all be associated with seances. The enemy loves to get it identified with getting all kinds of things out of whack. Yes, there is that world. But listen, in Galatians chapter 5, it says that witchcraft is also part of one of the works of the flesh that can be happening in believers' lives. I seriously doubt that this Saturday night, I got to be worried about any of you all dressing up like goblins and going out. Oh, maybe Joe will go out and do a little trick-or-treating. But I don't think all of you will be out dressed up with your costumes doing that. But can I tell you, I know believers. I have known what it is in my own life to be confronted with familiar spirits. What are familiar spirits? Well, their name tells you. They are familiar with your past. And they're familiar with your insanities. So, insane? I'm not insane. Have you ever repeated the same behavior thinking this time you would be different? If you're saying yeah, then you've been insane. There are some of us here today that have known what it is to keep, we're still doing the same thing, thinking this time it'll be different, and it'll never be different. That's insane. And familiar spirits know those behaviors that we repeat. They're familiar with them. Can I talk to his body of Christ? That's why we have to be careful what we speak. Because the spirit world doesn't know what you're thinking and you're feeling till you put it out in the air. And the moment you begin speaking it, now they're familiar with it. Say, this is heavy on Sunday morning. Would you rather me be talking about what Halloween is all about the week before? Or do we really want to know what the spirit world is all about and what deliverance is all about? And if it's not for the house of God, then why did Jesus say that he came in his sermon we gave you last week, not only to preach the gospel and get people saved, but he came to proclaim what he was going to do to the spirit world so that we didn't have to be bound. We could know what it was to be delivered. We could know what it is to be set free. We could know what it is to no longer be prisoners. We could know what it is to no longer be held captive by the enemy, but to know what it is to walk in liberty and to have the Spirit of Christ set us free and be free indeed. And that's what we're saying. God, will you do it Imago Day, that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there can be liberty, and we can now go from glory to glory and drop our veils and know what it is to be the image of God in Fort Wayne. That's why it says in the book of 2 Chronicles 13 that the enemy had a strategy in this civil war. And his strategy was this: we will have an encampment before them, but we'll have an encampment behind them. That's why the Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and in verse 14, and listen to what he says: we're not ignorant of Satan's devices. What are his devices? One of them is to bring a familiar spirit. And that familiar spirit is either to attack you from your front or to attack you from behind. The children of Judah looked, and then when they looked behind them, that was when they cried out to the Lord. Now, we're only going to have an opportunity to introduce this. Hopefully, it's going to be enough that you'll come back. Will you look at me for a couple minutes and don't take any notes? Buy the CD. Have you ever been troubled by verses like this? In Matthew 5, verse 48, Jesus said, "Be ye perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." Can I just, don't humor me, but if you really have been like me, where verses like that, you just would rather cross them out. Anybody else ever struck? Can I just see you? The rest of you all had no problem because you go, I am perfect. I didn't have any trouble. I mean it. Over my life, I've looked at verses like that and gone, how do I get to be perfect? Then I meet other people that talk about sanctification and talk about holiness and if you give this up and give that up, then you're going and so in my life, and finally then I went because I couldn't get all that perfect, then I swung the other way and said I couldn't be as good as others, so I just gave up, so I might as well go ahead and do the other. Then you got verses like this. If you just look at a woman with lust in your heart, boy, that's the quietest you men. I got men just looking around right now. If that hadn't bothered anybody else, I was at ORU when all of a sudden guys said, well, I might as well go out and commit the act because I'm already going to be held accountable for it. And all they got was a look. That was all kinds of screwed up teaching because of people that were saying what Jesus wasn't saying. Here's another one that really got to me. Colossians 2:10 that says I'm complete in Christ. Everybody else was saying it, and I was saying it, but how come I was still in bondage to other stuff? And nobody else was talking about it, so I'm not going to talk about it either. Till all of a sudden, I got in bondage to it where I couldn't get out. 1 John chapter 4 and verse 17 is a verse that if you watch some on television, I believe they're distorting the verse. And that's where it says in 1 John 4 verses 17 and 18 that as he is, so are we on this earth. And one of the things that tickles me to death is that one of the guys that's preaching that, they're not going to get involved in it right now. I hope he sees me on YouTube because I heard him preach it and he said, hey, does Jesus wear glasses? Then why are you wearing glasses? Does Jesus have sickness? Then why do you have sickness? Hey, is Jesus crippled? Why are you crippled? As he is, so are you. And the guy that's preaching that is preaching with a wig on his head. You say against wigs? Do whatever you got to do to help the temple out. But don't get on TV and tell me because I'm wearing glasses or I got canes that I ain't being like Jesus. If you're like Jesus, he ain't got a wig either. It's in that context that Jesus says, as he is, so are we. For his perfect love casts out all fear, for there is no fear in love. What is that perfect love? And we'll close with this. If you come back tonight, we'll start here. It's all of a sudden when we have a fear, and the spirit world can become familiar with it. And the fear says this, I'm going to lose what I have. I'm not going to get what I want. That fear says you have lost something. And if only that hadn't happened, you'd be happy today. Or that fear says, if you keep doing all that, you're never going to get it. You're responsible. So you better find someone or something or someplace to make you happy. And that fear so dominates that now there's a civil war. And in your civil war, you become scattered from the things of God. And scattered from the things of God, we now get captive to these other spirits. But Jesus said, I've come to proclaim liberty, and I've come to proclaim freedom. Can we bow our heads for just a minute?